I think we will start.
Okay.
So I am really thrilled to have you join us today as CoreClarity presents a conversation about virtual interaction and facilitation with facilitation expert Christie Ward, who's a certified speaking professional. She's a master at facilitation, but probably more important than any of that, every time I've been in a workshop with her, I've learned a lot. And that's why we wanted Christie to be our guide today as we start to think about how we move from that in-person, face-to-face, we can touch each other experience to this new virtual picture of face to picture of face, can't really touch each other experience. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Christie to kind of get us started. First, I think by talking about the difference between training and facilitation.
That's great, Gary. You know, there's a lot of differences, and some of them are not so subtle. In training, we've got objectives. We have things that we need to get across to that group of people. We know what they need to learn. And in training, we're the SME, we're the subject matter expert.
Right.
In facilitation, it's a little different. In facilitation, it's about the people in the room. It's about their expertise. You cannot direct it as much as you might be able to direct training. You might have a very scripted facilitator's guide that tells you how much time you have for each particular section. If you try to do that as a facilitator, it's going to be a little difficult,
right?
Because what percolates up out of the room are the outcomes that need to happen in facilitation. Now, for many of us, Gary, and I know you're the same way, we do speaking, training, and facilitation, and sometimes we blend those things. I cannot remember the last time I did a conference breakout or even a keynote that I didn't do interaction, because it's part of how I connect with those people in the room. I'm not just going to talk at them.
Right.
So in my mind, facilitation is a listening skill, much more than a talking skill.
Yeah.
So I think if we can give you anything today, it'll be, how do I do that in this virtual setting? And how do I kind of blend and know when is the time to speak? There's a time for a lecturette. When is the time to train and get across concepts? And when is the time to facilitate? Step back and listen and let the group process.
Yeah. And so as we're doing this, just wanted to let all the viewers know that Mandy Snell from our staff at CoreClarity is going to be producing us today. So she's going to be kind of taking care of us. And then on the other side over on Facebook, Ryan Selking from our staff is also going to be kind of keeping an eye on everything. So if you have a comment or a question, pop it into the Facebook chat. And if we have some time, we will try to grab some of those before we wrap it up for today. Christie, back to you.
Okay, so let's talk about who the people are in the room and who we need to take care of, right? Who are your learners? Who are those people? That is the most important question that you need to ask and answer before you start, which means that you need to have some things top of mind before you get started. If you do a pre-questionnaire, you find out about people. CoreClarity is really good about doing this. And I think it's a critical piece that we all need to be conscious of. Who are your learners? And so here's a couple of questions to ask.
Good.
What do they already know? Whoops. Did not want to do that. What do they already know, and what do they want to know?
Yeah.
So as trainers, I know what they need to know. I know what I've been brought in to teach them, but I need to figure out what they already know, and I need to figure out what they want to know, because those, you know, what they need to know and what they want to know may be two very different things. They may be looking at my syllabus or my core content or my course description or whatever it happens to be and thinking, well, what I really want to know is, if I can find that out ahead of time, then I'm ahead of the game.
Right. Yeah. Good.
Yeah, and any other questions? I know, Gary, sometimes when you work with groups, you've got some other questions that you also
want to so they fit in with these. I have what I call my 4 questions. So what do they already know? What do they need to know? What do they want to know? And then what do you want to tell them? And what most people do is they forget your questions. They just go right to, what do I want to talk about?
I want to tell them. Yeah, absolutely.
And what you're telling us, what you're reminding us is it has to be about our participants and not about us.
Right. Yeah. Right. And I think that's critical with facilitation, but I'm learning more and more that on this forum, because there's so many distractions, because there's so many other things going on for people, including in this day and age, the garbage truck riding by the house, somebody knocking on their door, the dog barking, whatever the heck is going on. So to keep people focused, it's all about what is in it for them.
That's right.
And that's an old saying. We've said that forever.
So with that in mind, how often should we be interacting with our participants?
Okay. In the day when we were talking about face-to-face, we have a guru named Bob Pike in this business who taught us all that we should interact face-to-face in a training session about every 8 minutes. One of our gurus at the Association for Talent Development, Cindy Huggett, who's written the Virtual Training Handbook.
Yeah, great stuff.
She says that it needs to be every 4 to 5 minutes.
Wow.
So do the math. Okay. If you are looking at every 4 to 5 minutes in a 25, 30-minute presentation, you're looking at 7 to 8. Wow. You know, that's a lot. So what I'd like to do is share with folks some real easy kinds of things to do, so that this doesn't need to be rocket science, and you don't have to be a super expert on even whatever platform you're using, but you do need to know some quick things you can intersperse, throw in there that every 4 minutes, because that comes quicker than you might think.
Yeah.
So another thing that I want you to be real careful of, and I will be talking about this a little bit, is something I call cueing.
Cueing. Okay. Yeah. Tell us more about that, because that fascinates me.
Yeah, it's being crystal clear and specific. It's stating the exact actions you want somebody to take. In a live classroom, we might say, so what do you think about that? And we pause a minute and we look around and we watch eyes and we see who's responding to what we just asked. That is far too broad a question for this forum.
Yeah.
I need to be, you know what I mean? I need to be super specific, state the actions I want somebody to take, and I need to cue it ahead of time.
Well, you know, what's interesting, Christie, is that for those of us that are used to being in a training or facilitation space, face-to-face live, we've gotten good at learning how to read the room.
Right.
But you can't read the room when the room is all over the country.
Right.
And so this cueing is really important so that we can get information from our participants about where they are in that moment.
And I need to respect the platform as well and realize that people are distracted. So what I mean by that is I might need to give somebody a heads up. So I might need to say, so John, in a minute, I'm going to ask you what District 5 is doing about this. So now John, who may be multitasking, is all of a sudden very focused on the fact that he needs to get his head back into the game.
Okay, wait, I have to get off my phone right now because she's about to ask me a question.
Exactly. So, and I think that's really important. I think everybody needs a safe face, and we certainly don't need to make anybody feel foolish, because if we do, they'll sit back and they'll wait for us to just teach them something, and they won't participate. And my goal in facilitation with this is to get people up and running and facilitating. That means I need to make them feel comfortable.
Well, then, is there a way, so I mean, maybe I'm jumping ahead, but I'm wondering, is there a way that we can minimize some of those distractions so that we can get them to stay focused?
Yeah, because distractions abound.
Yeah.
I'm going to show you a quick little piece that you could add to any program you're doing. And I think the value of this is not that we do it all the time, but that we have what I call a slide sprint, which is about 10 slides in 2 minutes. And you go ahead and time me on this, and we'll see how long this takes. If you've got a quick clock there, to time me on this, I'm going to go through 10 slides. Now, when you do a slide sprint, what it does is create movement everybody's eyes are on the screen. All of a sudden they're focused, even if they were multitasking. But you can't do it about heavy, heavy content. You need to do it about something that is kind of light, an introduction, or a little piece that's a transition piece. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
So let me share one with you.
I'm ready to time you.
We'll just see what you think. Okay, ready, go. Maybe just as important as who people are is where they are. Because right now, people could be anywhere. They could be sitting out on their porch. They could be in a small office with a child on another computer. They could be possibly even sitting in a parking lot in their car. So where are they? They could be at home. They could have 3 different screens. Some people have all these monitors and all this set up. But a lot of us are just, well, working at home. So we may not have the most ideal situation in wherever we are working. Some of us are with our best friend, or we have children joining us at work right now, and those things can be distractions, right? So the key is for us as facilitators is to cut through that distraction. I can't think of any one of us that's been doing this for the years that some of us have that isn't looking forward to being in front of participants again, face to face. We love that, don't we? Not getting on the airplane, that's not the fun part. What's the fun part is having people, live folks in the front of the room. But the good news is that whether you are virtual or face to face, you can create participation that creates interaction, and it goes very fast. There is almost nothing that we can do in the face-to-face classroom that we cannot do in the virtual classroom. It may feel a little bit different, but if you and I make it about the learner, then we will succeed. Okay, timing, Gary.
Okay, that was 1:45.
Okay, 1:45, and I did 10 slides. So do you see how that flows? And I also want you to notice that these are minimalist slides. There's not a lot of words. Right. There's not a lot of text. That's a key. And I talk you through it. And I don't have a script for that. I follow the slide flow. Right. So here's my suggestion, folks. Come up with a 10-slide sprint that you can put in at different times. Maybe it's a transition for you. Maybe it's a way to move from one piece of content to another, to connect the two of them, but make it super simple. And the content, again, is something that can flow. It takes a little time, but if you have that and it's in your deck, then you can pull it up when you need to make sure that people are not distracted.
So I'm curious, if let's say you're doing a 60-minute event, a 60-minute facilitation event, would you do 2 of these or just 1, or it really kind of depends?
I might do 2 or 3.
Yeah.
One of the things that Cindy says is that what we're finding is we need about 3 times as many slides. And for some of us who have not been into the PowerPoint parade, that is a little difficult concept to grasp, but it makes perfect sense because the movement is what generates engagement for people. Right. It gets them to watch the screen, but also to be listening to us and what our content is. And it pulls them away from whatever is in their immediate environment. Yeah. So I would say 2 or 3 in an hour's time. Some of you might want to do a few more. Kind of depends on the content that you're training.
So would you then, so just kind of logistically, do you recommend having them at almost as separate PowerPoints and just switch over to that one when you're ready? Or do you have it like at the end of the PowerPoint with like a...
Well, I have 2 screens up and I have my presenter view on the other screen, which means I can go anywhere. Gotcha. And with what you see in front of you without clicking through slides. And I don't know how any of us lived without presenter view because I live by it. But that way I can have them in there and I can go to them quickly. And by the way, if you're a little uncomfortable with that kind of movement, then put people into the chat for a few minutes, ask them a question and have them over there working on that while you switch out and go to a different deck if you need to.
Yeah, that's really smart.
I think sometimes we don't think about the fact that we can keep people busy just like we do in a live class, right? Just like we do in a face-to-face. you'd say, okay, turn to a partner, talk about such and such, or talk amongst yourselves about such and such, or whatever. And then we go into another space, or we look at our notes, or whatever it happens to be.
Yeah.
People don't expect us to be perfect with this, but they do expect it to flow. And they expect us to know and direct where we're going and direct their attention. So this is just one way to do it.
So you raised something that I kind of want to backtrack to something we talked about earlier in terms of what do they need to know. And I'm curious, do you recommend always covering the basics of how to use the application? Like I was on a call the other day and someone said, type in the chat, and someone else said, I don't know what the chat is.
Where's the chat? Yes,
yeah.
Absolutely. I do. I think we need to set some guidelines up front. And I think having like a slide, one of the things I do lots of times when I open a class is I'll have a map up and I'll say, go into your annotation tools and put your initials next to where you were born. And I have a world map, right?
Oh, okay.
Because I work with global audiences. And so, or they can put a stamp, which is another thing. Now, first of all, what just happened? Well, what just happened is that people say, where's the annotation tools? I never used those before. So we have to direct them to that. But I have that up before we even start the session, so that they are engaging and getting comfortable with the tools. Sometimes, you know, and I've seen many facilitators do this. In the chat, everybody open your chat box. That's over such and such a place. Here's where you're going to find it. And in the chat, tell us where you're from. And so what happens, and make sure when you're in the chat that you look down at the bottom and see that you're sending the message to everyone, and not just a private chat. There's a time for a private chat. That can be used as a exercise, as a activity. So I'll share that with you. But that's, yes, I do suggest.
And that's a big, and just as a reminder to people that are watching, at least for this session, we are talking about things that we know work in Zoom. They may work differently in whatever application you're using, but they probably do exist.
Yes.
And so to be aware of that, but that also brings up another issue of making sure as a facilitator that you've pre-run all of this stuff without anybody on the call, so that then when you do it, it's not the first time you're doing it.
Right. And that you know where all of the prompts are, because the little prompts, the yes, no prompt, and which, by the way, is on your participant panel, and you'll see a yes and a no, and then you'll see a more. And one of the things I like to do with that, Gary, just right up front, if I'm using Zoom, is push everybody to the participant panel, push them to that more button and say, do you see the little coffee cup here? Would you put up, this is queuing, would you put up that coffee cup if you need to step away from your computer so that I don't call on you?
Very good.
And then, you know, and that's a Zoom thing. But there's other things in other ones where I could put an X or something to let somebody know that I was offline for a few minutes, because I have to realize if I've got a class and it's 3 hours long, that somebody might have to step away for a moment.
Yeah, well, and you just raised another critical issue, Christie. So you used the words, if I have to call on you. So I know that a very basic, great facilitation tool in a live face-to-face workshop is, so would somebody like to share whatever? Right. And that doesn't really work the same in virtual, does it? We have to do it differently, don't we?
Yeah, what I have found is that I will ask for a volunteer first. So who would like to, like we're doing action plans at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So who would like to share one of these, you know, what are you going to do with this information, or who's ready to use this back at work, or whatever it happens to be. And so Mary steps up and Mary gives her response. And I say, thanks, Mary. And by the way, when you're done with your action step, you're going to choose the next person.
Right.
Okay. So now everybody's on high alert. It's like, oh my God, is she going to choose me? But that's good, because then everybody's listening and it's not me policing everyone.
Very good.
It's that person. And then I remind the next person, okay, Jerry, so now It's your turn. And when you're done, please choose the next participant to share.
Right.
So I kind of see that's the cueing thing. I got to tell people what to do. I got to tell them what to expect. I want them to look good. I want them to feel confident, because even when I tell them, they forget. And I have to remind them. But just recognize that this forum is new for most people, and they're struggling with it a little bit. And because we're on video is intimidating to folks. I also show them how they can step away from the video and just put a picture up or their name, so that can be another cue as to the fact that they're not online with us at the time.
Like that.
Yeah.
So I put up my picture, and then I start my video back up, and I'm here. And that can let you know, as the facilitator, that I stepped away. And I might even be smart enough to mute my microphone, so you're not hearing me going into the kitchen to get my Diet Coke.
Yes, and that's another cue. We have to tell people unmute, mute, because they forget. We're not used to that. We're used to opening our mouth and talking, and the person we're talking to can hear us. So that is not the case on this forum. And I think there's just these little things we need to do. Let me show you another activity that I think is super fun. And I use this one when I teach analogy. Whenever you do a fill in the blank, I'm cueing them as to what I want from them, but I'm giving them an opportunity. And what I'll do is I'll set up private chat. So I'll have the partners written in chat. So this is another great reason to have a producer. So I say, okay, Gary and Christie, you're going to private chat in a moment. And what you're going to do is finish this analogy. Resilience is like physical fitness because... And I'll repeat it. Resilience.
Back to my SAT days way back when.
So because an analogy, of course, is when you take a concept and you tie it to something that everybody knows. But maybe if I'm teaching about resilience and change, I want to tie it to something people already know. So that's why I would do this. Now, I'll send people off to private chat. I give them 2 minutes to finish this analogy. And then we come back and I put it on gallery view, which in Zoom means that you see everyone. So I would take the slides down and have people share what they came up with. Okay, now if I had groups, I might put them in breakouts, but I like the private chat. Private chat is just like in a classroom when you say, turn to your partner, turn to the person sitting next to you. That's what makes it work. But you must set it up ahead of time. Otherwise, they're going to pick somebody and you're not going to know who they picked. I don't turn off private chat. I leave it on.
Yeah, I've never turned it off either. I like the option for people to interact with each other. Now, sometimes they leave it off because of legal issues, but I actually like having it on as well. One quick pointer I've learned, though, is when somebody private chats with you, you need to realize that that's now triggered. And so like if you send me a private message, if I now go send a message to everyone, it won't go to everyone, only go to you until I change it back to everyone.
That's a great cue, Gary. And so after the private chat to say, okay, now everybody, before we move on, make sure that your chat is now queued to go to everyone, because there'll always be somebody who will do that. I've gotten private chats that were meant for somebody else. And
me too. Funny. Me too.
That's always funny.
So what about, I was just, I'm sorry to interrupt, but what about like games and competitions? Because those are a big deal in the live sessions in the face-to-face things as well. Can we still do that in the virtual?
Yes, you can. And I love competition, especially if you're working with sales teams. So let me give you another example of something that I do. I do something called a relay.
Cool.
And I do this live as a review technique. And I have 2 charts set up in different parts of the room and 2 teams. And I have a word written down the left vertical of the chart. For example, I'm teaching conflict management. So I have the word conflict written down the left side, CONFLICT, right? And the 2 teams then line up and they have to run to the chart and they have to write something that has to do with what we've learned together that fits that letter. So if they got L in conflict, it'd be listen. If they got O, it might be opportunity. I mean, they come up with anything, right? But they get into this running across the room. So I thought, how on earth can I do this in a virtual? Well, I can either set up a document for each group in the chat for them to take into a breakout, or I can set up a whiteboard in each breakout, two teams. You need just 2 for this. And they have to come up with the words as fast as they can, right, with their annotation tools. And then first team back to the room, shares their ideas with us. So you create some, you don't tell them how much time they have. You just say first team back is going to get a prize, or first team back wins, or whatever. But it's a relay is what it is, but it works. And so, and I've done it, and it surprised me how much people got into it, and they write over each other. No, I don't like your word. I put my word on there, and just come up with a word that you could do this as a summary or as a review. I think during any facilitation, during any training, we need to review what we just went through, and this would be a great way to do it. I would love to see this done with some of the different talents too. See, you could do this with, any number of things. You could write that word down.
So you could actually write the word achiever, and then send the groups and say, all right, come up with some representation of the achiever talent. And so for E, everything goes on a list.
Yeah, perfect.
Or the C of achiever, check it off the list, or something like that.
Right.
I love that.
Yeah. And it gets everybody's energy going. They have a job to do, and they don't want to look bad to their team. So they're going to engage. They're going to be participating. They're not going to drop out. You're not going to see any coffee cups during this time. They're going to all be in there, and they're going to all be focused and doing something. And I think we got to come up with activities that pull people back, because there's so many things to pull them away from this virtual setting.
Well, and it also can be, so depending on your situation, you can prepare by sending things out to people. So one of the things that we just did, we have a class coming up, and we sent them a set of balls of different colors to represent the different quadrants of the CoreClarity key. And so at one point we'll say, all right, now which quadrant is your top talent in? And mine's in the magenta. It probably doesn't look magenta on the thing. So they can just hold it up, and at least they are interacting with their camera and then with us.
That's a great idea. And I do some real tactile things like that as well when I'm building and establishing rapport.
Good. Talk about
because
that.
I think that that's a critical piece. And one of them that I've done, and I've done this live, and I now do it in the virtual setting, is I'll say, so pick up something on your desk that represents you as a learner. I want to, now establishing rapport, I got to know these people.
Learning is fun.
Okay, that's
and
super.
It's a little whiteboard
Perfect.
eraser.
And you see what Gary just did. He picked up something and he showed it to the camera. I might pick up my little headset that I use when I'm on the phone, because I need to listen carefully more than I speak. And the more I listen, the more I learn. But everybody's got something sitting around that they could pick up. I've seen this done so many ways. I had a guy in a live classroom years ago when I did this live, and I tell people, pull something out of your purse, pull something out of your pocket. He pulled out 2 dimes and he said, I change people's paradigms.
Oh, that's funny.
Are you ready for that? I mean,
that's
you don't
quirky.
know what I thought it was so clever. So kind of dorky, but clever.
I love it.
So I think the thing is that as a facilitator, when you open the floor, you don't know what you're going to get. I have never had anybody come up with something inappropriate, but it could happen, in which case, you are in control and of the environment and of the people that are there, and you just move it on and you take it somewhere else. But it's never happened to me in 30 years. I have never had somebody inappropriate with this, but it's fun. And now we're at our desks. We've got all this stuff. So why not do that?
Cool.
Another way I establish rapport, and this is a super easy, is just write yes or no in the chat.
Okay.
And so I might do that, and I've done that with CoreClarity, in fact, getting people as a refresher back into the content. So I might say, and come up with 7 or 8 of these. I might say, all right, in the chat, tell me yes or no. Do you talk to everybody in the grocery store line? Do you talk to everybody when you're at the gas pump and you're pumping gas into your car and you have a mask on, but you can't stop yourself from talking to people?
Well.
Okay, you know what I'm talking about. I'm talking about WOO.
Which stands for winning others over.
You win others over.
Right.
And so I would go through in the CoreClarity context several different of the talents and come up with a statement. Do you, and then people put yes or no. Now, here's the fun thing about this is that people don't just put yes or no. They put things like, yeah, Dustin, you do that all the time. And they start talking to each other. It's hysterical. But that's exactly what you want. You want that kind of engagement with the content. I believe any activity we do needs to connect to whatever it is we're talking about.
Right.
It's our content, it's our context. Sometimes you can do something that's kind of frivolous and out there, but
right.
I don't think we need to do that. I think we can tie it into our content, everything that we do.
I think our participants expect us now to tie it into the content.
Yeah, they do. They're looking for content. Absolutely.
So as we start to wind down, what are some ways that we can review what we've covered so that we are continuing to reinforce as we would normally do in a live face-to-face session?
Okay, let me give you a couple of review ideas here.
Okay.
In live classroom, we've got a chart, and many times we can go ahead and review some things. Sometimes we can do a mind map or we can do sticky notes. I think we can do that virtually as well, but I think it's going to look a little bit different. Could you send people off to do a mind map? And could you send them off? In fact, you could even create a slide that had a couple sticky notes on it, and they could use their annotation tools to write down some of their key takeaways.
Nice.
And I suggest you review often. It's not something you wait to the end of your session for.
Right.
You review at least every 30 minutes because you're getting a lot of content and you're having a lot of discussion, and sometimes you need to just get it out there.
Yeah.
One of the things that we do in a live classroom is that we ask people for answers and we toss the ball.
Right.
This is a perfect, but now people don't want to take a ball from somebody that they don't know, they touched the ball, et cetera, et cetera. So we couldn't even do this in a live classroom anymore.
Right.
But online, this is where you would say, so Gary, give us your action step for that. And when you're done, you choose the next person that you're going to pass it to. This is where you would do this.
I love that.
Yeah, and one of my favorite things to do is to come up with a case study or scenario, but case studies are long and involved.
Right.
And so you do that as a micro-learning or a review after the training. But ask a what-if question. So if you're teaching something on feedback, you want to say something like, so what if you needed to give feedback to your boss? What if? All right, we've talked about giving feedback to employees. What if you need to give feedback up? Okay. So how would you, and this is where the cueing comes in the chat, give me your first sentence. How would you open the conversation to the boss when you need to give them feedback? Now this takes in all we've learned about feedback, but now we have a little bit, it's a little bit tougher, but it's a review. It's almost a little quiz and test. So it's not a full case study, but it's a what-if question.
You also could turn it into a game where you say, the first person writes the first line. All right, now whoever's number 2, read that. Now what would you write next?
I love
that. Almost like one of those improv games that we've seen people use, but you could do it in the chat. Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. So there are so many ways that we can do this, Gary, and I think sometimes we just don't realize that. I want you to remember what I said earlier about interacting every 4 to 5 minutes.
Right.
Any of these techniques, and I have a great infographic for you to download that'll give you some more tips.
Right.
And I'm open to that too, because we all learn in different ways, right? And how a person learns is not up to me, it's up to them. And I need to figure out what that's going to look like so that I can make sure that they learn what they came there to learn and they get their questions answered.
Right.
Sometimes that means less is more, particularly on those slides. So I just wanted to share my contact information with everyone so that you have that. And I would be open if you have some content that you are saying, I don't know, what on earth could I do with this? And you want to shoot me an email, you want to reach out to me, I will get back to you and say, well, here's an idea. You know, you might want to think about this.
So a couple of quick thoughts as we wrap up. First, the infographic that Christie just mentioned is in the Facebook chat, but it will also be available for anyone that needs to get to the video. We'll have that available so you can download that infographic. It's wonderful. Lots of good ideas in there. Second, just a reminder that as awesome as Christie is and as giving as she is, I do not expect that you are asking her for hours of her time for free. So if you need help from Christie, this is something she does professionally, and please expect that. Reach out to her with your questions. And as one of the most brilliant marketing people out there, Lois Kramer, says, if after a few minutes this is starting to feel like a coaching session instead of I have a question, expect that Christie's going to have a conversation with you about what investment it might be for her to help you with that. And finally, Christie is one of hundreds of amazing CoreClarity facilitators that can help people understand their talents and leverage them individually on their teams and throughout their organizations. And so go to CoreClarity.net and you can learn all about CoreClarity and about all of our excellent facilitators that you can hire for your organization as well. Any last thoughts, Christie Ward, Certified Speaking Professional?
Thanks for having me, Gary, and thanks to all of you for tuning in and deciding that engagement is important, that you can do this, and that it does not have to be difficult.
Yeah, very good. Thanks, everybody, and good luck on all of your facilitation opportunities.